Welcome to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast. Conversations with today's top ministry leaders to help you lead better every day. And now, podcasting from the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center in Chicagoland, here are your hosts, Ed Stetzer and Daniel Yang.
Welcome to the Stetzer Church Leaders Podcast, where we're helping Christian leaders lead and navigate through the cultural issues of our day. My name's Daniel Yang, the director of the Church Multiplication Institute. And today we're talking with Dr. Eric Mason. Eric's the founder and pastor of Epiphany Fellowship in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the founder and president of Thriving, an urban resource organization committed to developing leaders for ministry in the urban context. Eric's also the author of several books, including Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. But before we talk with Eric, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying our interviews, make sure you leave us a review. Now let's go to editor-in-chief of Outreach Magazine and the dean. Oh, your whole new title is messing me up. The dean of Talbot Seminary at Stetzer.
That is true. That is true. Hey, and I love how you called Philadelphia in that. It was very. You can tell you're from Detroit. You know, Philadelphia is not your place. But yes, and this is the first podcast where actually we did the introduction that I am the dean of another place. I am the dean at Talbot Seminary, still not officially moved. I start in July 1. So I guess right now I'm still the executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center and dean at Wheaton College, but there is a transition afoot. And so that's now official. Well, it's podcast official. Is it like once it's podcast official, I guess it's official. So, but today we have my friend. Like I've known Eric Mason for a long time. We were almost both young when we first met each other. And almost. That's a long time ago. We were both young. And Eric's been a friend for a long time. And gosh, I still remember you going there to Philly and Philadelphia or Philly. You got to pick one or the other there, Daniel, one or the other. And so we've actually, I've had you on the radio show to talk some about this. Sometimes I'll reference the radio show. Those, Ed Stetzer Live is on Moody Radio Network and affiliates. And I really like this for this audience. So this is pastors and church leaders. And not every pastor is going to be in an urban context. Not every pastor is going to be engaging in some of the contexts that you write about, but I think it's important for us to know the issues that are at work here. And so again, the book that we're going to be particularly focusing on is called Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. And so let's just kind of just weigh in a little bit this and start with, if you wouldn't mind, telling us a little about your context, where you are, and then how is it different in urban context from doing ministry in other contexts?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. So I think, my context is a complex urban context in that it's superlatively transient now. It didn't used to be as transient, but it is superlatively transient now. So we're 2 blocks from Temple University. Average income of long-term residents here is between 15 and 25,000 per household. But then you have gentrification that's happening south of here. So it's a really, really complex urban context. And so you have, it's pretty much 50% Black in the community, but thank you. But it is basically other percentages, college students and other. So when you deal with those type of complexities with different people groups, you deal with a lot of different complex issues in a city. So because our church is transient, our neighborhood is transient. Our church is more regional now than a community church, even though we do community things for people in the community, which is an adjustment you have to make. Urban is no longer a geographical term, though, because of the internet. The internet has transported, in my estimation, urban culture globally, and so I believe the internet is urban. When you define urban, the Census Bureau defines it by 1,000 people per square mile, so that's fundamentally how it's defined. So, because culture is so transportable now, everybody is dealing with urban issues. So, yeah.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about specifically the article, the book. Excuse me. The book is written towards an urban context, with a specific connection to African American community as well. So, what are the cultural arguments that you're responding to? Because there are different arguments in different communities. I'm doing this Bible study series out here at Mariners Church, where I'm serving as a scholar in residence. And I just went through what I called 5 watchful dragons using C.S. Lewis's idea. There are certain things that in this community that the watchful dragon sort of blocked the truth getting through. Tim Keller talks about defeater beliefs. And you talk about cultural arguments against Christianity in the Black community. What would those be? Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so fundamentally, there has been a strong job done on the Black community to say that Christianity is the white man's religion. I mean, that's fundamental to a lot of people in the Black community. That started with the Nation of Islam. Really, Noble Drew Ali with the Moorish Science Temple, who trained some of the leaders in the Nation of Islam, and the book talks about that. And so that issue is connected with the issues that were passed down through slavery, Black codes, Jim Crow, and systemic racism. And so in the Black community, we're not talking about the gap theory and arguing about the gap theory and, the Jesus seminar, back when they had emergent church and all of that. Like that, those were never issues in the Black community. Fundamentally, in the Black community, one of the main issues is the issue of dignity restoration. And somebody will ask, well, what do you mean dignity restoration? Well, of course, through slavery, chattel slavery, it affected our dignity with the way we're treated, being saying that we were 3/5 of a man. We were used to breed. We were bucked by white men. And so families were broken up and then let out of slavery with no counseling, no economic plan kind of thing. You had Black codes, which really was a way to reestablish slavery from a systemic way, and then you had Jim Crow, and then you have what we have now. And so, when evangelicalism in the West doesn't understand that when it denies systemic racism, it literally makes it difficult for Black Christians to evangelize, because there's no Black person that I know that would say, unless you're a few Black people that really don't identify with Black people, that will ever say that there's not systemic racism. So when you're on when somebody's on a tweet rant saying, well, systemic racism doesn't exist, and they don't even realize that they're making obstacles for the gospel for us, because it makes us look silly. So why would you be a part of a religion where people will be racist towards you in this country, but then deny it's happening? They say it's the worst form of abuse. And so, everything from white Jesus, everything, if you look at most scholarly commentaries, you put out any scholarly commentary, every one that has the picture on it has, the apostles and every Bible character looking like, even Egyptians and Ethiopians at the time looking like, a European medieval type person in garb from 2,000 years ago. And so it's a lot of issues to work through, but fundamentally, Black dignity and Christianity being the white man's religion is the fundamental issue that we deal with.
Interesting. And I mean, you went through a lot of things fast there. You're a remarkable communicator, and you bring those things quickly. So you talked about the depictions. I mean, I'm guessing not so much in commentaries, but in like children's books and things of that sort.
Yeah.
So you talked about depictions of Jesus. You talked about the denial of systemic racism and more. So, because again, this is, again, right now we're in a very challenging cultural moment when it comes to how people are talking about race. CRT is brought up regularly, and of course, systemic racism. I mean, I believe in systemic racism long before I'd ever heard of what CRT was, but now
absolutely,
it's kind of let's put all that together in one category to people. So, so how then does the denial of those things in the same Christian community that you are, we're kind of in the same Christian community where, I don't know if you use the word evangelical to describe yourself. Many African-American churches don't, but where we have similar beliefs. I have a theological background that's got a lot of connection between the two. So what would you want, pastors and church leaders, our audience, are predominantly going to be white just because the numbers add up that way. What would you want them to do to speak into their community to be more effective in building and helping you build bridges in your community? Does that question make sense? Am I wording that all right?
Yeah. I mean, of course, I wrote it in my book, World Church, but one of the things, I had like 3 or 4 A's that I would go through. First off is be aware. And what I mean by being aware, we're not told history well in America. American history is told to all of us from a very patriotic standpoint. And so to skip over different aspects of the challenges of our history. Matter of fact, what's beautiful about the Bible is the Bible tells truth about history. It didn't paint David and Saul and Solomon and Jeroboam Abraham, different people out to be perfect. It told the truth about their history, about their anointing, their height, everything, and then their lows, and all of those were lessons to learn from. I think that when you have a institution like slavery that lasted 253 years in the country, and you go through a history manual, and it's only a history book, it's only like 3-4 pages on not only Black history, but Black history is focused on slavery. And then slavery is only told in a few pages when it's the foundational story of how America was formed. I just think it does us a disservice. And I believe that's why people can deny racism, because of the way we're educated. So I think, number one, people need to be aware. And this is not to say that every white person's racist. Nobody's calling every white person racist. The issue with racism is we talking about it's a system. It's not to condemn you. It's about the system that's set up. And if you believe in sin, you should believe in systemic something. But not only that, you got to acknowledge. So once you are aware, acknowledge, that there have been issues. You got to begin to say, you know what, there are issues, there have been issues, and it continues to be issues, and they are deep-seated issues. But then I think be accountable. And so that means holding one another accountable to being a prophetic voice to it. And so, and I know for, you asked about white pastors, I know some white pastors who have, and this is tough. It's really, really tough. Because I know of a pastor in a certain part of the country. I don't want to say what part of the country. He in a godly way began to communicate to his upper class white church some of the challenges of racism in this country. His church was 800. It went from 800 to 250 people in a week, and then they had to sell their building and then move into a school. And so, there's a cost to it for some. And so I think they have to count the cost. If you're going to speak into this issue, you got to count the cost and lovingly communicate it to your congregation where they are and help shepherd them through it. But then finally, I would encourage people to be active. In other words, it's not enough to be aware. It's not enough to acknowledge. It's not enough to just say something about it. There's also being active. And so active can look like a few things, being honest about, it's a book out there on Blacks in the Bible. And so that you can, as you do your exegesis and talk about scripture, somebody said, well, the Bible's not about ethnicity. It's not about ethnicity, but it sure talks about tribes and nationalities from Genesis to Revelation a whole lot. And I was taught in my hermeneutics class that if something's repetitive, there's something going on in the text. So, so God doesn't deny nationality and ethnicity. He affirms it and wants to redeem it for his glory. And that's why he wants all tribes and nations. He says he could have just said, I just want people saved. He said every tribe, nation, and tongue. That's for a purpose. Because God wants heaven to be a reflection and a kaleidoscope and a mosaic of the glorious picture that he wanted in the beginning when Adam and Eve were called to pervade the earth with with God lookalikes. And so those are just a few things that I would encourage people with.
Eric, I want to dig into that a little bit more, especially into the idea of Black dignity, because I think there is something about like the Nation of Islam that tapped into that desire for Black dignity. But there are those who maybe don't quite understand that, and so they easily lump in Black dignity with like maybe Black nationalist groups. Can you help those who are kind of sorting through this?
Yeah, so I think dignity is restorative, right? And so that's just a biblical idea. That's James 2. The doctrine of partiality versus impartiality. So I think that's superlatively important to have a dignity restoration, right? Where we're affirming that something, we're born with dignity, image of God, imago Dei type stuff, right? Genesis chapter 26 through 28. That's the normal, beautiful dignity that every human being should have of value in creation. However, all nationalism isn't bad. I think that there is nationalism that's bad in the sense of where it wants to subjugate other people groups, any type of nationalism that subjugates other ethnicities, tribes, or groups under them. That's not a biblical idea. That goes against dignity, right? However, and Paul, Paul would have an issue with that as well. Jesus would have an issue with that as well. And so I think, it's nothing wrong with having a value of your ethnicity and your nationality. Paul did. He said, he talks in Romans about about his Hebrew lineage, and he talks about it in Philippians chapter 2 about his Hebrew lineage. He affirms that, and so we don't have an issue with that. I think when we talk Black nationalism, we talking about there's a difference between Black nationalism and Black radicalism. And so when you look at Black nationalism, for the most part, it's a guy named Edward Blyden and Alexander Crummell, who were Black pastors in the 1800s to the early 1900s, were trying to develop Pan-Africanism, and so and fundamentally spread the gospel among the diaspora of global Blacks. And so a lot of nationalism for us comes out of that. But then you have, after that, later, Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a Black nationalist, but really that his form of Black nationalism was just for Blacks to be able to have their own state in Liberia, and just be able to develop our own economic system, have our own nation, and that kind of thing. However, when you go to the Nation of Islam, it's a little bit different. It's more so their doctrine is surrounded fundamentally by saying the white man is the devil. That's different than just saying we want separation, like Asians, like you're going to Chinatown, right? You're going to Chinatown in a city. It's dedicated to allowing Chinese people in that particular part of the city to develop their own economy, to flourish, and it's a beautiful thing. Nothing wrong with it. Nobody gets mad at Chinatown. You know what I'm saying? We enjoy it. We go to Chinatown, experience the culture, but we affirm the beauty of them developing their own economic system. And so I would say, nationalism in and of itself isn't bad unless it's radicalism, because radicalism then is something totally different.
But you mentioned Woke Church, your book, which again, when you wrote that book, it was published by B&H Publishing of Lifeway. So, this is not exactly a
Moody.
Oh, I thought it was okay. It was Moody. It was by Moody. Okay, I'm on Moody Radio. Yep. Okay, so thank you. So when you had those conversations around Woke Church, and you saw the backlash that came. You did this before. This is before the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
You spoke at my church in January right before COVID, and then the world all changed. But also issues of race change, and now woke is a word. Well, first, tell us a little bit about the word, how you used it in the book, and what it might point to for the future after the backlash.
Yeah. So I think that the word that we've used for years in the Black community is conscious, and really conscious just means just awareness of the issues that surround Black people in the country, and not being duped by any type of injustice, right? Or selling out kind of thing. Is he a conscious brother? Is she a conscious sister, right? That's what that meant. Woke became a word that was a term, and conscious is something that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about 100 years ago in The Souls of Black Folk. But, woke now, woke then was just being conscious, just being aware. And I saw it as a redemptive term that we as Christians can use, because the Bible says, awake, sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine upon you. And so for me, woke, of course, just meant being aware generally of the injustices and justice issues that surround Black people, and trying to come out of it, being aware and not being in the matrix, if you will. But what happens with terms that or movements in the Black community, no different than the civil rights movement, the far left will co-opt the terminology of the Black community, and what they'll do is, when they co-opt it and use it for their issue, the first time that the far right hears about it is not in the etymological foundation that it came from with Black people, but they hear about it from the far left. So what happens is, when you hear a Black person saying a word that you're hearing the far left saying, you assume they're saying that, but they have co-opted the term, and now it's introduced to the world more broadly. And then the right wing pounces on its current usage within that far left community. And we do too much research to not do some study and know the difference between the two. And so when we talk about that's something that happens a lot. Even people, you ask different people about the civil rights movement. Same thing with the civil rights movement. Should we be protesting and da 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 da? But it's like they co-opted. The far left co-opted everything about the civil rights movement and used it for their issues. And so that's just something that we always need to be aware of.
So do you think, Eric, especially in urban contexts, do you think the word woke is still useful? And the reason why I ask that, it's not so much about the word that it connotes, but it also feeds into all this other things that we'll talk about in a little bit here, and that is, how do you work more broadly with other groups? And so I guess a big part of what you're getting at there is that it was being redeemed. It no longer is looked at as that by many people. So is it still a useful term? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, if I'm saying if we're saying that around each other, you're saying that around Black people and people in the urban context, like nobody looks at it like, the far right. Like no, right. They just don't. Now we do talk about it in our own circles about when the far left is losing their mind about something. And we're like, it has a dual usage. So we'll call, when it's just like if I say, you know a term that like in Philly we use the word Joan. Joan can be anything, right? She's a Joan means she's beautiful. Man, that's the Joan. That means it tastes good. It's contextual, but I know how I'm using it based on context with who I'm talking to. When it's a far left person, we say, man, they too woke for their own good, right? Mm. But then we'll be like, man, are you going to be woke or what? See the difference? And so for us, there's so much nuance and dexterity with language that is just not the same thing, man. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I think the when we think of these things, here we are. We're going to focus on apologetics. A big part of it is knowing the lexicon, engaging the vernacular. Those kinds of things. So when you start doing apologetics, and again, just so everyone knows, the book we're talking about is Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. So what does it look like to do apologetics and evangelism in what is your setting is a predominantly African-American urban setting? What does it look like there?
Yeah, and so it's multifaceted because to do evangelism here, you have to minister to the whole person, period. Titus 3:14 says, let our people learn to meet pressing needs in order that they may not be found unfruitful. Right before that, it talks about God being a philanthropist. The Greek word philanthropeo is being used to talk about God's love for us, right? And how that poured out in his passion for us to engage us, to save us through the regenerating power of believing in Jesus Christ. And so in my context, it's multifaceted. So you have to do word and deed, real simple, word and deed. Because Philly and you know how the East Coast can be. East Coast cities can be very untrusting when it comes to people that if you plant a church in the community, they think you're after something. What do you really want? And so number one, it takes time. Number two, you have to view it as I know that this is about church planting, but you can use this in relation to evangelism. One plants, one water, one adds the growth. And seeing that whole 1 Corinthians 3:6 philosophy of ministry as a part of that. And so that means you're building common ground, Colossians 4:2-6, right? When you're building common ground with unbelievers, how do you build common ground? We built a playground next to us. We started a boxing league that has 300 kids. We work with the local police with that. We did a basketball league. We do an event outside called the Diamond Festival on Diamond Street that has 3,000 people out. We do free haircuts, free clothing, health screening, crisis pregnancy, where we're helping people who want to have an abortion, give them other options. We partner with a group called Alpha Care for that, and so they bring their unit up, and it's beautiful. We have health screenings. We give away thousands of pounds of fish we fried up and give away water ice. It's a beautiful thing. We do those events. We have an after school program because there's a 65% illiteracy rate here. And so when you're looking at those type of events, and now we're going into the economic development, because our church is changing to being more middle class as well, middle upper class, we're now investing in financial, wealth building, and not prosperity gospel, but I'm talking about just wealth building, managing your money and how to get an annuity plan for your life, and so grown-up stuff. And so but all of those are used as platforms to help people on the natural level, but we're also sharing the gospel with them through those mechanisms. So it's not to just walk the street, cold turkey kind of gospel presentation, which is nothing wrong with street preaching, nothing wrong with going around, going door to door. But really, we want to create a relational common ground to where, as we're building relationship, it makes the gospel communication just way more natural.
Eric, what are some of the lessons you learned from planting Epiphany? And I'd love to hear you from two perspectives. One, as a urban missionary, and then number two, your own personal leadership development. What have you learned?
So we've helped plant probably 50 churches from South Central LA to Malawi, Africa. And one of the big lessons that you have to learn, and I know Ed would agree with this, always never stop planting your church. Never, ever stop planting your church. I think I have his book that I used to write my perspectives. It was blue back in the day. His book on church planting. That was like my church planting Bible. So that's one of the lessons, because one of the things that and saying never stop planting your church, somebody says, what does that mean? Never take your eyes off of what it means to learn your context. If we take our eyes off our context for a year, we're in trouble. And so us personally, because our neighborhood changes too much. And so I think that a lot of times the church can be an ingrown toenail many times, and not really begin to develop a way to just flesh out connecting within it. Does your community know you're there? That type of thing. But then also utilizing every mechanism to cast your net as wide as possible. I think that if you're not doing technology now, you don't care about mission. I don't care who you are. If you're not figuring out a way in our country, I know that there are third world places that's different, and even out there they got cell phones. But I'm saying here, I think to really cast a broad net as a missionary, we have to develop a technological base that spreads our net as far as possible, because that's been a big piece of being an urban church planter, because you're in such a transient environment. Our Brooklyn church, we planted a guy in Brooklyn. I mean, I can't tell you how transient. I mean, they're flourishing. Epiphany Brooklyn is flourishing, but they, superlatively transient. Our guy in Delaware, though, he's not as transient. He has more long-term, middle upper class people there, and people that are on the block kind of thing. And then you have our church in LA that's in I'm going to say Compton, that's in Crenshaw section of LA, and they're doing a great job. Superlatively multi-ethnic church. He's gone through some transiency, and so one of the things that's helped them through that is constantly learning that who's around them in order to engage them and reach them in a healthy way.
So when you one of the things, we try to make these podcasts broadly applicable, because you'll have a rural pastor in Montana, you'll have an urban pastor in Miami, and people around the world. So but I think it'd be helpful for people to kind of go narrower or deeper for just a minute with you on what are some of the challenges to apologetics in the urban context, particularly in the African-American urban context. And then I'm going to ask you to follow up on that. I'm going to ask you what might somebody who is maybe not living in that context, but encountering people and culture from that context. So again, the book is Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. So kind of go deep with us on what that looks like on some few key issues.
I think the biggest obstacle is is us not treating apologetics like spiritual warfare. It's spiritual warfare. The Spirit explicitly says that in later times, many will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons. And so fundamentally, if you think you just going to pull out, a Norman Geisler book, or what's your favorite apologist book, and then you're just going to do this quick Q&A, you're going to pull out, I'm glad you asked, answering the tough ones, whatever one you want to use. And then you're just going to go in there and wax eloquent, and you don't bathe it in prayer, even at times fasting. You really got to treat, first off, apologetics like spiritual warfare. And so I think that's a fundamental thing you have to do. Because I've been in situations where I got in the flesh, and because I knew the answers, quote unquote. And so I was more about answering the question, but not reaching the soul. And so defending the faith is also reaching the person. So that's something that's 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 23 through the rest of the chapter. we want to bring people to repentance with what we're doing, right? And so we want to bring them to Jesus. We want to bring them into a relationship with Jesus Christ by God's grace. One of the challenges and the hurdles is really just people's, just getting on the hurdles, the things that are obstacles for people to the gospel, and getting around them to actually get to the actual issue that they're dealing with, and being patient with that. So I'll give you an example. I've started doing like these reels, right? And they have been really, really effective. Some of them have gone kind of viral. Almost several of them, almost 200,000 views and stuff like that. And I'll give you an example. Like I'll talk about, I'll say, one of the things with when I'm doing urban apologetics, Black people fundamentally do not trust white people. I'm just saying that, right? We just don't. So that's why it's easy to say Christianity is the white man's religion. So what ends up happening is I put out a reel saying that there's this book. I don't have it over here. Oh, there's this book, right? This is a new fake translation of the Bible called the Sefer, right? They got the book of Jasher in it, all of these weird mystical books in it, right? And and so I did a thing because it's growing. I mean, Hebrew Israelism is growing like wildfire. I mean, it's growing really, really. And if you don't know what Hebrew Israelism is, it's blacks believing that the blacks who came over in the slave trade are the original Hebrews, right? And that the Jews who are Ashkenazi, whatever, they're imposters. That's kind of like the whole thing with Kanye and all those different things. So, making a long story short, I say, so this is how we got our canon. I did a quick reel. This is how we got our canon, and this is the way we affirm, whether was it widely accepted, was it apostle or a prophet or someone that was a delegate or connection to him, does it claim authority, all those different things. And so if you look at the comments though, and you can just hear the hurdles. The Catholic Church, at the Vatican II, that's when they decided what was going to be in the Bible. The white people at the Council of Nicaea, and so you get all of these, and it's all of these pseudo answers. And so you're asking the question, what's the hurdle? The hurdle is looking at the spiritual challenge and the fundamental mindset of the cognitive dissonance. Getting around that it takes the Holy Spirit to get around that level of cognitive dissonance.
We've been talking with Dr. Eric Mason. You can learn more about him at epiphanyfellowship.org, and be sure to check out his book, Urban Apologetics, Restoring Black Dignity with the Gospel. Thanks again for listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders podcast. You can find more interviews as well as other great content for ministry leaders at ChurchLeaders.com/podcast. And again, if you found our conversation today helpful, we'd love for you to take a few moments to leave us a review. That'll help other ministry leaders find us and benefit from our content. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
You've been listening to the Stetzer Church Leaders podcast. For more great interviews, as well as articles, videos, and free resources, visit our website at ChurchLeaders.com. Thanks for listening.